This is what an amazing mountain bike looks like. This is what a shop owner who ordered too many of those amazing mountain bikes looks like. This is the 2023 Marin Rift Zone XR, and today we're going to have a close look at the details and features on this bike so that we can sell the last of these that we have in stock. From weight to wheels, price to performance, we're here to take a close look at bicycles so you can make an educated decision when selecting your next bike. In today's video, we're taking a look at this 2023 Marin Rift Zone XR. So starting off talking about this Marin Rift Zone XR, we will talk about the price and the massive amount of reduction we've had to make on this price because I was an idiot and ordered too many. The original price on this bike, $44.69 in Canada. Our sale price, $32.99. So this is what it looks like when a bike shop is basically willing to lose money because they ordered too many bikes. I am still absolutely astounded by the fact that we have any of these left, because this is one of the bikes that I was probably most excited of over the last few years and was absolutely certain that we would have a pile of customers knocking down our door to buy these. Why do I think it's such an amazing deal? Well, it comes down to the fact that I'm a huge fan of the Rift Zone to start with. This is 130 millimeter rear travel, 140 millimeter travel fork on this bike. So sort of mid-short travel trail bike with a really proven geometry, some great characteristics to the way the rear suspension works, and largely this thing just has an absolutely killer spec for a serious rider who is looking for basically their money to go into performance without going into things that are blingy without really gaining you extra performance. So I'm going to go into some of the details on this bike. I will touch on a few things first. As mentioned, that price, I have to walk around my light to show you, $32.99. This is a size medium in a 29er that we're looking at. And this one here in its stock format weighs 35 pounds. Now, with that considered, take into account, please, the fact that there are inner tubes, not very light inner tubes in these Maxxis Assegai tires, front and rear. So you would be able to take an automatic pound or so off this bike, and then otherwise 34 pounds for pretty much a trail bike that is capable of a very enduro attitude when being ridden, I think is pretty fair these days. So I'll go over a couple more things to do with the numbers. We got the price, we've got the weight. We have two different wheel sizes available on this bike, 27.5 and 29, and virtually all sizes are available in both wheel sizes. In the shop, we actually have, I believe we have smalls in 27.5 and in 29, and then we have all sizes still remaining in the 29er. That shows how many too many of these I bought. 130 rear travel, 140 millimeter travel fork. This is a single pivot rear end on this bike, or what Marin will call a multi-track suspension. This is the same suspension design used for 2023 models, at least on Rift Zones and on Alpine trails. And if you look up a lot of the reviews on this bike, one of the things that you'll often hear is reviewers being quite surprised that although this is a single pivot, the performance is much more in line with what you would expect from some of the fancier pivot designs. I've ridden this back to back with things like Pivot's DW Link and with Giant's Maestro Link, and actually with Rocky Mountain Smooth Link, and I think that it is easily in the same realm as far as performance. And when I speak of performance, I'm talking about efficiency, and especially when we're talking about Marin, we're talking about a fun, poppy kind of a nature that goes hand in hand with that efficiency. So it does that awesomely. So hold on and I will show you a bunch of things about this bike that you really should love, and especially at that price, if you're in Canada and seeking out an extremely capable, fun, well-priced, extremely well-priced in this case, bike, this is going to be a bike that you want to pay attention to. So I am going to go over a number of the details with this bike. So by the end, I usually don't make these videos sound salesman-ish, but I do want to sell a bunch of these things, and I want to sell them because I think people are missing out if they're not buying this bike, because it is just so good. So getting into the details on this Rift Zone XR. To start with, we'll show the rear derailleur, and that is indeed a Shimano XT 12-speed derailleur on this bike. So in the sub $5,000 price range, you don't often see it. So now we're looking at $32.99 and an XT 1x12 drivetrain. That is a Sunrace cassette. You are going to, depending on which size you look at in our store, they either came with a Sunrace 11 to 51 tooth or a Shimano 10 to 51 tooth 12-speed drivetrain. This bike still reflects the remnants of the COVID shortage of bike parts. We have Marin branded wheels on this bike. They are 30mm wide internal. They are set up ready to go tubeless, but they are not set up tubeless from the factory. There are tubes inside these Maxxis Assegai 29 by 2.5 tires on here. Like I say, tubeless ready. So all you'd have to do is buy some sealant and some valves, and you're ready to set these things up tubeless. We have some nice frame details on this bike. As I pointed out before, this is a single pivot. So this pivot being above the rear axle and on the seat stay means that this rear end is moving in a simple arc around that main pivot point. There is nothing bad about that. Once bike companies realized that getting this positioned properly meant you could get really good efficiency, the difference between a single pivot and a multi-pivot bike, its performance in both pedaling and braking, that difference has reduced a whole bunch. Proof of that, I would say, was the immense success that when Commensal was still running a single pivot on their downhill race bikes, they had a large number of World Cup downhill victories aboard downhill bikes with single pivot, and downhill bikes are usually where the suspension kinematics really gets noticed by riders. We have some internal cable routing here inside the chainstays, and then some sleek cable routing that brings it out of the down tube through and then back inside the chainstay there. It's really nice cable routing, I must say. Marin has now included this really nice chainstay protection, and that's both the case for noise and for protecting your paint, obviously. Underneath the seat stay, they've got the same sort of thing. So if you're really going through rough stuff, and even with your clutch on, your chain is blasting around, you're not going to get, or at least you're going to be minimizing any damage to your paint here or here. I would maybe do something to protect things right around here as well, as we have seen, no matter what the bike, but just in really aggro riding, this seems to be an area that you start to see some things happen. Going to the cranks, we've got these FSA grid cranks, a nice alloy crank with a narrow wide chainring. If you look between the chain rings there, you can see ISCG mounts. So if you want to run anything in the way of a bash guard or a little chain guide, something that goes over the top here, you won't have any issues with that. These cranks are attached to the bike with a external bearing threaded bottom bracket. So those sort of meet all of the things that most people are looking for when they're looking to criticize a bike, at least. Now, one of the things on a Marin, like I was talking when I talked about suspension, that These bikes are super efficient and they're also super playful. One of those things that makes these playful is the fact that your chainstay length is relatively short on these Rift Zones. It was increased, I think, about 5 millimeters since the previous version, but it's still considered short. If you're riding a size small, I would consider that bike to be really balanced. I ride a size large and I have spent a lot of time on a Rift Zone, and I found it to be a super, super fun bike. So if you watch Pink Bike and you go by the way that they discuss bikes, nobody should consider any bike that doesn't have long chain stays, and they should get progressively longer with size. That's great if you want a bike that is planted to the ground and basically handles blasting in straight lines through chundry stuff really well. If you're looking for a bike that is going to be a little bit more poppy, if you want to jump it, if you want to corner fast and actually have a lot of fun on your bike, I'm a big fan of short chain stays, and I don't kind of believe the hype that everything needs to have graduated chain stays with the size of the bike. You do get a little bit of a different feel out of this bike. For smaller riders, I think you'll feel a bit more of a planted bike because of that rear length ends up being a little bit more proportional to the front length, as opposed to people like myself. Love this bike because for manuals, jumping, all that sort of stuff, that short rear end with still a relatively long reach is a really fun combination. And I think we're finally starting to see the language in the tests talking about that. Instead of just saying good and bad, it is talking about the different characteristics, because there's no such thing these days really as a good or a bad bike. It is a bike that is good or bad for the particular feel and application that you are going for. Going back to the spec on this, once again, there are standout things in this bike. Now, where the $32.99 is a standout price is the fact that you're starting with a killer geometry and with money spent well in the places that are really expensive to upgrade. So as we look at the rear shock here, the fact that at that price point you're getting a Float X, you're getting a piggyback shock, that really is quite a standout. Even just getting a DPS shock at this sort of price would usually be a standout. You would quite often be expecting to see a very simple rock shocks or X-Fusion shock that just has rebound and compression, as opposed to, in this case, having a piggyback, which is going to give you a bike or a suspension that is going to perform really, really well on longer, bumpier descents and have more consistent performance through all of that. We've got a Trans-X dropper post. These are going to be graduated size-wise depending on the size of frame that you go with. This new, newer Rift Zone design gives quite a long straight run of seat post here, so insertion depths are pretty impressive. So unlike the previous version, which went away a couple years ago, this new one with a little bit of extra travel going to 130 rear travel, we also got that longer seat post drop or seat post insertion length that made the bike that much more useful for people wanting to run really long droppers. Being a single pivot linkage driven, we have nice looking rocker links up top here. We have room for a bottle on the down tube, that being an important feature. We have the updated fashion of this new cable port system, and I am a big fan of this grommetless way of running the cables internally. I've had people asking the questions on some of the other bikes, does this cause any issue as far as like not having protection for the cable at these ports? I would say it's actually the opposite. This port is actually helping to direct the cable on an angle into the frame, and so it's not catching on any edges, where the old grommeted design, and what's common on a lot of bikes, is the grommeted design kind of wants your cable to go straight in and then turn inside the frame. This is helping to guide the cable, which is good both for cable health, and it also means that once you have this guy down here locked, there's a little bolt down here on the exit port. You just give this a yank and you actually have a fairly taut cable in here that's going to be potentially less likely to rattle within the frame. So we have An amazing spec as far as rear shock and rear derailleur go on this bike at this amazing price point. Then as we step up front on the 140mm Bomber Z1, we are once again impressed by high quality stuff. A Bomber Z1 is a 36mm stanchion fork, which is about as short as you can get a Z1. This is most typically sort of ridden as a 160 fork. So they're really going for this XR nameplate on here, and when Marin uses XR, they're talking extra rad. This is basically, instead of in previous versions of bikes, they would have just a numbered sequence. They would have a Rift Zone 1, Rift Zone 2, Rift Zone 3. The XR, I think, is actually applicable because instead of just the spec getting a little bit better, it's the spec getting better with its ability to get extra rad, so getting a tad more burly, not just a tad more sophisticated when we're talking in specific of things like the fork and the shock on there. Brakes on this bike are courtesy of Shimano again. They are the M420. So the M420 is the highest level of brakes that still uses this long non-servo wave lever, but it is a 4-piston brake. It is clamping down on these 203 rotors here, so good quality braking. And the more and more tests I'm seeing on these M420 brakes, the more you're seeing from people being quite genuinely surprised at the level of quality of these brakes for them not being considered a high performance brake. So 203s in the front, 180mm rotors in the rear. This is a pretty traditional sort of a setup as far as rotor size. Showing the new gusset. If you're used to seeing the old Hawk Hill, that would have had a little bit of a gap because it's Hawk Hill or Rift Zone would have had a gusset up in the air there with a little hole. This new design is a little bit more sleek. It's helping to keep this top tube a little bit lower, and also gives us this very sort of linear top tube to seat stay sort of aesthetic, which seems to be a universally loved thing. Up top here, depending on the model you get, just like I mentioned with the cassette, that there are differing versions of this exact bike, either with Sunrace or with Shimano cassette. We also see some of the bikes that have this essentially no-name grip and some that have a brand new Marin branded lock-on grip. In both cases, they're lock-on, they're pretty thin, they've got some nice texturing and stuff, so good no matter which way it goes. Stems are short on all of the bikes, 35mm. Handlebars are 780mm, and most of the seats that we've seen on the XRs are this newer design Marin OEM saddle, which is pretty gushy for not having a fat, gushy sort of appearance. So we're hearing generally really positive reviews from buyers of the Marins on that new saddle. So this is a very quick summary. Quick thing on angles. We're looking at about 65 degrees, at about 77 degrees, and reach measurements that I would say fit this into just about everything contemporary out there. This bike is slack enough to be slack, but not so slack that you have to relearn how to ride a bike to not have front wheel washouts. All of the things that I've just talked about here are reasons that I think that this is an absolutely killer bike. I thought it was killer at the regular price. I went crazy. I ordered way too many of them, and now is your chance to get yourself a fabulous deal on a 2023 Rift Zone XR, now selling for $32.99. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you like listening to old people talking about bikes. If you're a nerd, if you like looking at things up close and actually seeing what's happening on a bike, because that's what we like to do. We like to help people make smart decisions and get awesome bikes and get out riding. Thanks again. Ciao.